All right. Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome to our final installment of our webinar series. I don't know what I'm going to do next Friday, not being with you all. Um, Very excited to have Martin from Get Your Guide join us. I'll do official intros here, but want to give everyone just 15 to 20 seconds to get join us, grab coffee, grab water, lunch, and then we'll go ahead and get kicked off. Welcome, like I said, welcome to our final installment of our November webinar series, Future Trend Fridays. I'm Nicole McLean, head of marketing here at Composely, and so excited to dive into our last trend on how to outsource and resource. We talked about a lot of things already, but how do you actually execute that in a really efficient way? So we're going to be talking about that and how some third-party partners might be an option on how to help you do that. Few housekeeping. Everyone is on auto mute. So again, please use the chat and the Q&A function. We are recording this, so feel free to take all the notes you want, but we also will be sending this. So keep an eye on your inbox. And then I will let Martin explain where he is. So he is working actually from an office, if you can believe it or not. I am not, but if there are any technical snafus, give us some grace. We'll get back in. But with that, please welcome Martin Hamery from Get Your Guide. Martin, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm working, so because I work at a travel company, we have a lot of themed meeting rooms at our office that are kind of based around certain activities that we offer on our platform. And this one is called Mexico City Wrestling Room. So it's actually dressed as like a dressing room in at a Mexico wrestling match. So
Yeah,
podcasting from.
I got to do the guessing game before. I very much failed. He was like, where do you think I am? I was like, I'm like a really cool pub, because Martin is actually in Berlin, correct?
Correct, Berlin,
Germany.
Germany.
Yeah, so it is a little bit later for him. And so I was like, I would not blame you, have a little pint in hand at a cool pub talking about marketing things. Like, what could get better than that?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm at the office.
Yeah, which is insane. So Martin currently is a senior project manager for content marketing at Get Your Guide. Um, he also has past experience starting in New York City at Tiffany and Co. Um, and I would love to dive into this more. I know you mentioned like you haven't had the most linear trajectory, but I think those are always the most fun and interesting stories. But to point, like you learn so much in each of those roles that you can then bring in. And I've had the opportunity to work with Martin, one of the most buttoned up, like fun people to work. So I don't want to obviously like look at your background. But so prepared and detailed when it comes to content operations. And so I know that there's going to be a lot of great takeaways from our conversation today. All right, before we dive in, I have to ask you, because I've asked all of our other guests, but we are T-minus 2 weeks from American Thanksgiving. So what is your favorite holiday Thanksgiving food or tradition?
Cornbread.
Okay.
So my mom is American. I'm only half American. I'm American and French, which also means that I didn't grow up in the States. So my mom kept this tradition alive just by cooking Thanksgiving dinner every year, but it was never in the States. So she was always very diligent about getting Jiffy brand in the American food stores, export markets, wherever we lived in the world, so that I always had the same cornbread.
Here I was thinking that maybe you had this like really great French inspired cornbread recipe and we're holding it down with some Jiffy.
No, I mean, is it Jiffy? Yeah, it's Jiffy.
Yeah.
And then Ocean Spray cranberries.
Yep.
Like I know
Oh
the
my
brand
gosh.
because my mom was very strict about which brand she wanted,
Oh,
but
I
I
love
feel
that.
that way I guess I had an American Thanksgiving every year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
Not
amazing.
celebrated here in Germany and France, obviously. So
Yes. All right, I'll have to send maybe I'll see if I can get some Jiffy shipped to Berlin.
I love that.
Um, okay, so to wrap up our series, if you haven't had a chance to tune into the first quick recaps, We heard from Kate and Lindsay on the importance of creating quality, authoritative content, ensuring that content meets the needs of your audience, and making sure we're leveraging channels like content and using that or obviously content as video to capture that authenticity and to repurpose it across channels and to be efficient as you think about that your strategy that way. But all of that, I think the main takeaway we heard is that's not easy. To create really good authoritative content, there isn't a silver bullet. You can't just throw in prompts into AI as much as we would love to, and magically your whole content strategy is there. So as we think about how to execute those, we're of course seeing a lot of unique and interesting ways that people are looking at resourcing their team. And Martin has done a great job of filling that in for their content strategy using different agencies, looking at internal teams versus outsourcing. So to kick us off, a common question I hear from marketers is trying to decide how to best resource their team, specifically thinking, should I hire this in-house or should we use in-house resources to execute this? Or do I look for a really good third party and let them take it from there? So curious, Martin, how do you think about that?
I'm just going to start just before answering the question, just to give a bit of context about the
Yes.
kind of content that I've had to work with. So just in my time at GetYourGuide, I've worked on scaling content like imagery, original imagery, so doing photo shoots. I've also worked with producing videos with content creators. And like currently right now, I'm working on scaling written content. So if I talk about content today, it's probably thinking of examples from across those three types of content.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah. So when thinking about whether or not to outsource work, I think the first thing I would think about is the timeline, right? Like, is this something, are you being asked to produce a lot in a short amount of time, which would basically mean scaling insanely in-house, and also how the duration of the project. So if it's something that's going to last, like be a permanent workflow, then you might want to invest in that internally. But if it's, I don't know, a 6-month project, maybe it's best to just scale with the help of third party. So yeah, timeline and the demand that's being asked of you. The other thing that I always ask myself when I just think in general, like what kind of tasks are better to give third party, like an agency or freelancer, or to keep in-house. I think it's just the amount of context that person needs in order to do their job successfully. So if a person needs to be aware of the company strategy and sit in company meetings and sort of understand how other teams at the company work, then it's probably easier to keep that in-house, because then they can make better decisions because they have more context of what you're trying to do, and will actually relieve you from making those decisions for them. If it's a very defined scope and, for example, written articles, like here is our brand voice or a tone of voice, here are content guidelines. You can brief maybe a few editors at an agency to do that, like Composely. Once they get it right, you can kind of give that decision process to them, and they can decide if something is on brief or not, if it's high quality or not. It's basically like, can you bring someone else external to the level of context that you have internally?
Well, and I think, and we were talking about this, in prep for this session, but it's also, I think, taking into consideration the current skill set of the team and even your skill set, because if you aren't great at evaluating content and whether or not it's good or not, or whether or not it follows a brief, maybe that's not the best thing to outsource, because then how do you really know if it's hitting the mark, or if something goes wrong, you can't necessarily help get it back on track. But then on the flip side, it's like if you don't have that skill set, sometimes it can be really expensive to hire that in-house. And you have the same concern when you're trying to hire is, okay, well, how do I really know if this is a competent employee to bring in to manage it, I do want to outsource it because I can get that. It's a little less risky. Can always part ways if it doesn't work out, and I'm outsourcing that expertise because I don't have it. Like, how have you kind of seen the most successful relationships when it comes to like your own background and skill set?
Mhm. Yeah, so I think it's hard to answer that question because my experience, everything that I've ever had to outsource, or every process I've had to outsource, um, have been processes that I've also managed internally. So it was always kind of like, this is how we do it, but we just need to do more of
Yeah.
it. So we just need help. And then sort of learning from comparing both methods. Um, I would say though, like if you are going to outsource with no knowledge of how you're outsourcing, like it would still be best to have someone in-house that can sort of keep an eye on that and manage that. But I don't know, maybe I'm just a tad too rational, but like before deciding to outsource something, I imagine you're also going to explore if you can just do it in-house first. So you're probably going to do whatever new process, you'll build it internally and try to manage it in-house before realizing it needs to move somewhere else. So I think, yeah, you just need to get a bit of familiarity of like what you're expecting a third party to do so that you can have a better idea of like whether they're doing it well or not.
Yeah, I think that is also really needed. And part of why we picked this as a trend is because I think coming off of 2023, we've seen just in our clients and our prospects, but even I've seen just in the market, um, finance and legal and even COOs and CEOs are just much less risk averse or more risk averse. I mean, these are always your classic roles that are very risk averse. But as they think, like, it's so hard to get people to think about long-term contracts. And that really is what an in-house hire is. Like, you don't want to, you mentioned timeline. I think that's a really important thing to think about. What is this need? You don't want to hire someone, onboard them, make them part of the culture, bring them in just so that 9 months from now, or even 18 months, 24 months from now, if you know there's like an end to that project, why are you going to do that for that to have an end point? Um, and so as you think about, I think a lot of times there was this trend of like, well, let's just hire in-house. We want that control. We're moving really quickly. We don't necessarily have things documented. Let's just hire someone in-house so they can be a part of the process. But now I think that's even hard to get legal, HR, finance, like be okay with making those in-house hires. And so that's where I've seen a lot of people go to external resources, whether they have the expertise or not, but it gives them a little more freedom and flexibility, you know?
No, I completely agree. And that's exactly been the journey I've had with multiple content production processes. You don't want to invest if you don't know if you're going to continue producing this, but you
Right.
want to produce a whole lot of it to test to see if that's what you want to produce. It's like this cycle. And that's where you start, and you kind of have to do it with limited resources and think outside the box. And to your point, third party is usually the most efficient way of doing that. And you can learn a lot from doing that. And then, yeah, and then you can maybe continue that relationship if you end up scaling that product. So,
Exactly. So then when you're looking for third party, what are some of the things that you think are important to consider when you're vetting?
mm, it's kind of like entering a new relationship. Like
Yes.
you, when I think about the times I've talked to new agencies, new freelancers, basically it's like compatibility. I don't know if I should talk about it in that sense, but it's really important to understand like, what's the background of this third party? What's their specialty? Like, what are they good at? How big is their team? Like, are you going to have five people helping you, one person? Um, get a sense for their working style, how they work together, and also their communication style, because those few months at the beginning when you're onboarding, it's going to take a lot of communication, a lot of feedback. And if it doesn't seem like you're going to be able to communicate effectively with the third party, then you sort of cutting it short. Um,
It's
so
funny
those,
you say that. I don't want you to feel weird about saying compatibility. Like it is, this is one of my favorite questions to ask like new clients. Hey,
Mhm.
you're probably looking at a bunch of people, like different options, what's that decision criteria? And the number of times, like I had someone who literally said, like, I mean, of course, budget and can you do the work, but assuming that's equal, she was like, it's just the vibe. Like it's an X factor. Like, do I find myself wanting to work with these people? Like they'd sometimes I would work with external freelancers more than people on my own in my own company. And you want to make sure that that's that there is that vibe and there is that compatibility.
Of course, like our content marketing team works with many freelancers. Like I think we manage short of 100 freelancers. And it's an extension of your team. I definitely work with many freelancers myself. Um, it's important to want to work with that person, to be able to, first
You
of
need
all.
to know if they can hang in the Mexican wrestling conference room. I mean, if you're not down for it, like it's probably not a good
Too
fit.
distracting for them, you know?
Exactly. Um, are there any questions or like, test projects come up a lot during a vetting process? Like, how do you know that basically like your gut is satisfied enough to be like, okay, I think this is going to be a good relationship. Like, let's get it started.
Mhm. Like, how do I know
Like when
if
you're
like
vetting a third party or like obviously, Get Your Guide and Compose, they work together. But like at what point are you like, okay, yeah, I've crossed my T's, dotted my I's. This feels like it's going to be a good relationship.
I mean, we do a lot of samples and testing, and we try to, you know, see how quickly a third party can get to the product that we want them to produce, or the content, let's say content.
So you
Um,
have a definition of good then already that you're getting them to.
so this is where it goes back to what I was saying earlier, where the processes that we're outsourcing to third parties are ones that we manage internally. So I already have an idea of like what we want. I don't have we don't have to have necessarily an idea of like what performs best or high quality, but it has to basically match what you're able to do in house.
Yeah.
Um, and so I would say that's the first sort of benchmark. Um, and yeah, when it comes to scaling, I also something I want to mention is when you're in that phase of recruiting a third party or an agency, that agency is obviously going to really want your business and they're going to put a lot of effort into the tests and the samples. Something that I make sure to ask is like, what effort went into this sample? The sample could be amazing, but like if the effort that you put in does not reflect what you would put in when you start increasing the volume,
Mhm.
then you're setting yourself up for failure. So if it seems like, you know, what they were able to put in for these tests, they can do that 10x, 100x, then that's usually a good sign. So I usually ask, you know,
It's a good question.
how was it for your team to produce these? I actually ask them like, what was your process like? And does it seem like something you can handle? So that goes back to knowing your third party, knowing what they're capable of and knowing like their comfort level with and confidence level, but true confidence level.
Well, that's so interesting you say that because I know, and I think this does depend on different types of content, like you said, but with writing in particular, it is a journey to learn and match someone's tone of voice. And I hear a lot of people say, okay, well, I assume that the sample you give me is the best it's ever going to be. And so if it doesn't match this vision in my head, like we're done, like this is as good as it's going to get. When in reality, I think the first sample and content is often the worst it might ever be because you're just going off of a random, like you haven't onboarded, you haven't gotten to know them and have these conversations that to me means it's only going to get better over time. And so I think it is, like you said, it's both like, of course, you want to put your best foot forward, but it's also under very limited inputs, which to from a scale perspective too, it's like, okay, great. If we're like pretty good here, we also will keep getting better because like they won't need to put as much effort in over time because we'll have those reps and we're learning and getting feedback. So it's kind of like a yeah, we maybe put more hours into this now to make it better, but like we shouldn't have to because we're learning too. So it's a really interesting.
Well, just being clear and asking like, do you foresee yourself getting, getting that process down more efficiently? But a good point that you bring up about first sample, because what I wanted to mention is always ask for a second round, because there is what a third party is able to produce just based on the documentation you give them, which is also reflects whether or not your briefs or your documentation and guidance is good. Um, but then after feedback on the first round, seeing how far that third party can go based on that feedback, because that'll also be a testament to how quickly they can learn and understand feedback and
Yeah.
apply feedback. So I know with Composely, like it was really good, and then um, then with feedback, like okay, it was pretty clear. Like if this is the process I'm gonna do hundreds of times with this agency, then it works.
Yes. Well, and one thing that I hope we learn from AI is a lot of people are saying, "Hey AI, what do you need to know in order to deliver this prompt?" Or, "Hey AI, here's my prompt. Like, what's missing? What can make it better?" I hope that people start doing that with people because a lot of times like briefing is, we've done a lot of content around like what is a good brief and what's needed and we're going to get to that with you too, but um I wish people would ask like, "Hey, here's my brief, but like what's missing that would make this easier for you to produce something or what don't you know?" And I feel like there's always this battle of course, you're outsourcing to save time. So if you have to spend hours to create a brief, are you really saving yourself time? So there's a middle ground, but I think especially as an evaluation process, asking, "Hey, here's what I'm giving you. Ask me 3 questions that would make this better. I'll answer them and then run off." Like you're probably going to get to a better initial end product.
Definitely. It's just understanding a third party or agency's ability to, I don't know, um, evolve with the production process as well.
So this is a great transition to what do you think a marketer who's looking to outsource, whether it's a videographer, a writer, a designer, need to have in place already in order to make a third party successful?
Good briefs. Like I'm shocked by how many people in marketing don't know how to create a brief. I'm just gonna say that. A good brief has examples. It's accurate and it doesn't have conflicting information or contradictory information. Um, I think, yeah, it's also just it's hard to explain to someone exactly what you want. So briefs is it's not just about the briefs. It's like having a really solid brief. Um, and then I would say making sure that the people, let's say with example with Composely, just top of mind, if you're going to have editors on the agency side, they're also going to be proofing the quality and whatnot of the writing on the agency side, making sure that they also understand. So having good touch points with them, very frequent touch points with them, feedback. Um, and yeah, just also making sure they understand what you're trying to achieve. And I think this goes back to what we just talked about, but not to go back to that point, but like being able to have that kind of rapport and exchange with a third party, it's important because that's how you're going to keep getting better at getting what you need. Yeah.
How much documentation around, voice, visual identity, tone, the vision, unique value props, do you feel like needs to actually be documented before you can work with a third party well?
Um, this is one that we haven't cracked. I mean, I know that we have very, very detailed briefs for written content, which are great because it's like we know what we want to what we're asking for, but can sometimes be overwhelming. Um, I don't know, because right now I'm thinking that's written content, but like for imagery,
Yeah.
imagery is much simpler. Like you just have really good examples. and then you just look at the image and you feel it, and you just have some specifications. I think that's the easiest kind of content to brief. Writing is just like it just ends up being so subjective because it's like tone of voice, it's someone's choice of words. You could go back and forth and say this is on brief, not on brief, but really it's just two people and their different opinions.
Well,
I
and
think
that's
the big
even an internal struggle,
that's
a
why
lot of
I don't
times. Go ahead.
sorry. No, go ahead. I was just saying it like you said, it's not just a third party struggle. It's like it's if we don't know internally, then yeah.
Well, and I think it's size of company too. Like too often at small startups, the voice of the company is the CEO or the first marketing hire. That's
Mhm.
just the nature of kind of how it goes. And then as you grow, you really have to say, okay, well, now I have a second marketing hire, or I'm the CEO and I've been doing all of this and it's been my vision. And now I'm hiring a marketing person. I have to tell them how to continue doing that. And then you suddenly start putting structure around it. Um, it, but when you're a bigger company, a lot of times you do have maybe more rigidity, but how do you really police that? You kind of can't. So it's finding this happy medium of letting people, because you don't want everything to be robotic either. I mean, from a written perspective, if one person's doing all the content, there's only so many ways you can talk about your brand or an experience. I mean, using Get Your Guide, like, I'm sure almost every city has like a children's museum. If you have one person writing about children's museum content, like how unique and different can that be? Even though it's maybe consistent, it's probably boring. And so you do want to have people bring their own take on it, but
Mhm.
so I mean, it is just a really hard.
Yeah, it's really hard. And this is why I wish my colleague Lydia were here because she's our
We love
editorial.
Lydia. She's so great. We'll have her
And
on
make
another one.
when you're a bigger company, well, when you're in a bigger company, you have one person being that strategist and um, defining and
So
also
true.
right now we're looking at what we're doing next year, and it's like we're doing a lot of tests and seeing like, is this even the way we should be approaching written content? So it's just constantly having a learning mindset as well, and it
Yeah, I love
evolves.
that learning mindset. And I think when to the third party too, like a lot of times it's almost like dance monkey, or you think like or I've seen that with a lot of designers. I have a lot of designer friends that, you say like make it punt. I mean, that's the joke is like it needs to pop more. It's like, okay, well, what does that mean? Or I think it's being mindful of how you give feedback. And then if you have that open relationship, again, it goes back to compatibility, then you are suddenly figuring out this really hard thing with a partner versus like order taker, because an order taker is just going to do exactly what you say and they're not going to be part of the process, but a partner is going to help you solve this and make
Mhm.
recommendations too, and I think that's an important piece that sometimes gets missed.
Yeah, I like that we're continuing the partner metaphor and relationships.
Yes.
No, it reminds me like the times when I've seen that a third party isn't really delivering quite exactly something you want. This distinction you're making is very on point because like the more you can give context to the third party about like what the goal is actually, not just like what it's supposed to look like here's the lines draw inside it, but like this is what we're trying to achieve. For example, we want our content to be customer centric. We want someone who is trying to book their trip to land on this page and get ideas, be inspired, and book. Like if you start to explain the end intended outcome and like what your actual objective is, you are basically equipping the third party with a kind of a decision
Yeah.
framework for making decisions of like, it's less about is this on brand, is this off brand? It's more like, is this doing what it's supposed to do? And
Yes.
that's like what you do with a partner. You kind of try to align like common goals or like trying to solve the common problem as opposed to being like, this is what it's like for you and this is what it's like for me. It's actually sounds like the same, it's different. Like instead of speaking like that, kind of looking together, what are we trying to do? And kind of trusting that once they understand that they can make those trade-offs on their own.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and something that I think gets to really what has to be defined when you're working with a third party is what's the objective or the goal.
Yeah.
And that should be the ultimate decision factor for a good third party to say, okay, am I writing this and do we believe that whether we agree or disagree, do we can we stand behind that this piece is achieving the outcome that we all want? And it suddenly becomes a little clearer of like, okay, maybe I would use this word, or maybe, our CEO would want to say it this way. Is that really the most efficient then, as we're getting into like specific word choice versus this will achieve the goal we want?
Exactly. It becomes
I
objective.
know we are at time, and I have two questions for you. Well, at least some examples I was hoping to share. So maybe we can try to be very quick in this. But as you think about scaling, there's been a couple instances of just my opportunity to work with you where I'm like, okay, this is like, of course, why wouldn't I think about this? But any examples you can share on things you've learned about scaling and workflow?
Mm. I think, yeah, with scaling, like the ultimate like goal is to be able to produce more and just have externals help you do that. And that it's supposed to, take time and resources off you or your internal team. Um, but in reality, it's about investing as much as possible in terms of time and effort or energy at the beginning, at the start. So this
Yeah.
translates as engaging with your workforce from the beginning to yield a better quality results. So just as an example, like I gave with Composely, but also like when I think about freelancers that we work with, freelance project managers,
Mhm.
spending or freelance editors, the more you time face-to-face time, like actually take the time to go give feedback, go through the briefs, explain what you want, give them context. I always like talking about what the actual strategy is, because once you give them that decision framework, then they can make those decisions on their own. And then when they can do that, they're actually taking work off of you. If they're asking you about different words, it just becomes, like I was saying earlier, an expensive business. if
It
if
does.
three people to actually do the task that you're trying to make one person do.
Well,
So
and I
giving
love,
time at the beginning, yeah.
yeah, I was gonna say, giving that time in the beginning, one thing, I mean, this is very tactical to our relationship, but I think it can be transferable in others is obviously a big part of SEO content or just creating authoritative content is EEAT, and authorship is a piece of that. And I don't even know if you remember this conversation, but it really stayed with me because we have travel writers who have experience in a lot of different things. Some are foodies, some are outdoors, some are um, you know, more artsy, some are multiple. And so, but tailoring the byline and the bio of someone, if they're writing about the best places to eat, but their bio is all about how they're outdoors and whatever, like that's probably going to be a little bit of a mismatch into like, why are you authoritative in talking about this? But if their bio is more geared towards, they've studied culinary school or whatever, and so what we work together on is creating like kind of the master bio of like every nuance that they could have. We're not going to use that for every piece, but now we spent at the front of the relationship for all the writers on the account. Here's kind of the master bios. You have them, and now your team can pick and choose what makes the most sense of that bio when publishing. And now it's authoritative, it's easy. You don't have to keep coming to us, 3 months in. Okay, well, now we're actually writing about this instead. Can we tweak the bio? It's like, no, we did all of that work up front, and it's
Mhm.
much more scalable.
Yes, yes, that is a good example. I mean, that is a good example. It's realizing like you could easily say, oh, we want a customized bio for each article. What does that mean? Okay, write a customized bio for each article. Then just
Yes.
realizing, why don't we just gather information and then just do it once?
And also understanding like, yeah, we could write a customized bio, but that's going to add more time or expense versus like what's kind of the good version of that, which is being able to tweak slightly and have some customization based on topics, but not necessarily 100% custom every time. And that was like a great medium.
Yeah, the sweet spot between like, is it doing what it needs to do, but it's not, loosening the grip and not having it be perfect, perfect, perfect.
Yes,
Sometimes perfect is not what you need necessarily.
exactly. Okay, well, I know this is, which I figured, one of our longer webinars. So thank you all for staying with us. Lots of great takeaways. But to kind of wrap us up, Martin, any final advice you would give to marketers heading into the new year and thinking about, content production?
Like me exactly right now trying to plan 2020.
Yeah, literally every one of us.
Yeah, so I don't know because it depends on like how much content operations you're involved in, but like it always takes much longer to build things and do things than people think. And I also know that marketers are uh, love to have opinions and love to change their ideas and pivot when things don't
Chase
seem
the
like
latest trend.
just change, change, change. And if you are the voice of content operations in the room, just being clear with them, like, for you, it's 20 seconds idea. For us, it's like turning a ship around, and just making them remember that things take time. I find
Yes.
myself a lot.
Even if you don't have a Martin in the room, I think it is just an important piece for marketers to have that little like Martin on their shoulder of like, wait, let's think about this a little more. What are the implications? What is the team bandwidth, etc. And I think even our CEOs need some of that
Mhm. Yeah,
rationale as well.
yeah, I think the last thing I can think of there is also with all this content production, senior leadership, executives, whatnot, they're all waiting for results. Um, but I like to think of learnings as results, and I
Yeah,
think we forget that we might not get the results we want, but on the way we've learned so much, and that's golden and worth investing in as well.
absolutely. Okay, Martin, thank you so, so much. And thank you for welcoming us into the Get Your Guide office and giving us a little fun for a Friday. Thank you to everyone for joining our series. We will be sending this out as well as all three recordings so you can take a look at the trends and how to execute them in your 2025 strategy. But until next time, I'm Nicole McLean with Martin, and we'll see you at the next webinar.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks everyone for joining.
Absolutely. Bye, everyone.
Bye.